You were watching last week. We had some technical difficulties on the air that caused our interview with Levy Sanders to be cut short. We want to apologize for the inconvenience to you, our viewers, and to Mr. Sanders, who's here for a do-over. Levy, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
So last week we sort of talked about this unique issue of living in the 2nd Congressional District and running in the 1st Congressional District. Let's talk a little bit about your hometown, Claremont.
Yeah.
What's the best way to economically revive cities like Claremont?
Well, it's basically start in terms of getting a $15 minimum wage. I think that's absolutely critical. Tuition-free colleges and universities. A lot of folks in Claremont, as well as throughout. I'm going to just highlight District 1. District 1, 4 out of 10 folks actually go to college. We need to get that up to 7 or 8 out of 10. So whether it's in Claremont or it's other folks in terms of areas, in terms of District 1, we need to have apprentice programs for people to choose not to go to college. But that's kind of the way I think that we need to, definitely, whether it's Claremont or other folks, increase, what's going on.
You've got that base of support there at home. How do you transport that into CD1? Usually people have this network of supporters in their neighborhood. How do you sort of transpose that into CD1?
Adam, I can just tell you, when I listen to folks, and we talk whether it's in CD1 or CD2, people are just, Medicare for All is really what it's about. And that means basically guaranteeing health care to everyone without out-of-pocket expenses. The Affordable Care Act did a pretty good job, but it did address the ridiculous high co-payments, deductibles, and premiums that people are facing, and how they're so profoundly anxious just to even go to the doctor and or the hospital.
Lakes Region General Hospital in Laconia is going to close its maternity ward. Before we get to Medicare for All, which is going to be a huge undertaking, perhaps, if this happens someday, how do you more quickly address the issue of these rural areas where neonatal care is disappearing for moms?
Well, ultimately, the reality is basically we need to put more money into the situation. The reality is basically whether it's an issue in terms of veterans, health care in Manchester, whatever. We need to put more money into this situation and demand basically that people get the high cost of health care under control.
You mentioned the VA. What are some steps you would take in Congress to ensure that places like the VAMC in Manchester is not only functioning but just thriving?
Yeah. Well, I was in Tilton yesterday in terms of a wonderful forum, and I talked to folks about that issue. Again, it's really just saying that people who put their lives on the line should have the best health care in the world. So we need to have an integrated system. We need to assure basically that we don't privatize the VA, and that we have a VA that's very similar in terms of Medicare for All. As you know, in terms of when you look at veterans health care, it's almost like democratic socialism. Everybody ultimately is entitled to get it if in fact they were a veteran. I think we need to continue that process.
I mean, veterans care is not something that people view as working very well, though. I mean, you really want to draw that comparison?
That's a really interesting issue, Adam. I can tell you, I talk to a lot of veterans, and I think the healthcare system is doing pretty well when they tell me. It's not perfect, and we need to basically ensure the fact that people don't have to drive 50, 70 miles. They should be able to do 20, 30 miles, and they should be able to go to any place they want in terms of in the state of New Hampshire. So we need to basically assure that, and the beauty of Medicare for All, that will allow us the opportunity to do that any veteran or anybody else has the opportunity to go to any hospital they want or any doctor office.
Is it a mistake to hybridize the VA? I mean, allowing these veterans to access private medical care rather than public, I guess. Do you agree with that?
Well, no, we just definitively cannot privatize, the VA. I think you'll talk where Vermont Foreign Legions, a whole host of folks, they say basically we should not privatize. We need to put more money into it. Right now, I think ultimately we're not doing a very good job in terms of digitalizing. The fact is there's a lot of paperwork there. It's taking people way too long to get their benefits unto itself. So the point is we just have to do a better job in terms of putting in more money, particularly in terms of the Manchester VA, which desperately needs it.
If you go to Congress, you'll be dealing with President Trump in Washington. Is there anything you see him getting right now?
Wow, Adams, you're going to get me into a lot of trouble here, but here's the bottom line. It's basically about the fact what's right for the American public. So ultimately, I think we can work on the issue of infrastructure. We ultimately know, I think everybody understands is that our bridges have very serious problems. People have a lot of anxiety in terms of driving over the bridge. I talked to somebody yesterday in Tilton who talked about the anxiety associated with that. We know ultimately that in terms of our sidewalks are crumbling, we got a lot of problems. So ultimately, definitively, I think that's definitely an area that we can work on.
What about his protective tariffs? Is that a good idea, bringing back some of these items that will protect American industry, even though some say that's going to harm consumers?
Adam, NAFTA was a disaster. CAFTA was a disaster. We need to ensure the fact that our jobs are staying in America and not going to other countries throughout the world where folks are getting paid starvation wages. So what I can tell you is that this is obviously a very contentious issue. You folks, in terms of the steel mill, or in terms of steel workers, they will say basically it's positive, and other, unions to say it's a negative. But the most important thing, we need to ensure the fact that we have good paying jobs here in America.
You mentioned tuition-free college earlier. That's one of your key policy proposals. What are some steps you can identify that will reduce the cost of college while not impacting the quality? So if you do end up subsidizing that major endeavor, that it's not going to cost taxpayers an arm and a leg, the way it is moms and dads who are paying for college.
Well, Adam, the reality is it's costing us money every single day. The point is, ultimately, there are a lot of really good paying jobs in New Hampshire, and folks, a lot of employers that I talk to say they can't get people to do these jobs because they don't have the skills, whether it's apprenticeship. So that's the most important thing. But it's ultimately going to help our economy. When you have an educated workforce, that's going to help out the economy in innumerable ways. So the bottom line is that people who ultimately have college degrees, as people understand, are going to make more money than people have high school degrees. But again, we need to ensure the fact that whether it's apprentice programs or training programs, that's free to folks who they can actually become plumbers and electricians or whatever else they want to do. But the point is, we definitely need to do a lot more in that area.
Let's talk energy policy. The man whose job it is to keep the lights on here in the region, Gordon Van Wheely, is the head of the ISO New England, recently gave another talk at St. Anselm College, and he once again reiterated his fear that we're approaching a point right now where at peak demand in the winter, if we have an event where we lose some power generation capacity, there could be rolling blackouts in New Hampshire. Obviously, not a good thing to happen in the dead of winter in extreme cold situations. He says renewables can't get the job done just yet. He needs more capacity. He's saying things like natural gas. He needs to keep nuclear power plants online. Do you agree that maybe we need more natural gas, or how do we get to that renewable future before we have a problem?
Adam, we're not pouring enough money in terms of alternative sources of energy, and we need to do a lot more where there's geothermal and a whole host of other areas, solar or whatever. So we put more money into it, we can definitively do it, and it's actually much more cost effective.
Take us through what sets you apart from the other 8 candidates that are in this race.
Great question. Well, again, Adam, I still don't even honestly know what exactly the other people stand for. I can tell you, I'm from a Medicare for All. Some other folks are not. They're for Affordable Care Act, and they also really don't articulate specifically. They use the word access. I don't even understand what access for health care means. I basically believe that everybody is entitled to have, Medicare for all, tuition-free colleges and university. I know folks don't necessarily believe in that concept. Paid equity for women. So these are kind of things that separate us. The fact is, ultimately, I don't take super PACs. I deal with small donors, and I think the fact that I've worked in legal services for over 17 years, I've been in a union for 23 years, I've been on the picket lines, I've been in strikes, and I've also been in election, in terms of 2000, in a presidential election, where I was so fortunate enough to talk to so many folks in District 1 and throughout New Hampshire about why it's so essential that we have a $15 minimum wage and tuition-free colleges and university and a whole host of other. And basically what happened, as you don't think, is that the establishment kind of woke up to the reality those are things definitively that need to happen both in New Hampshire as well as throughout the country. You
mentioned your dad's presidential campaign. Sometimes when we talk about dynastic politics, it can get fraught with these father-son things. People talk about that a lot with the Bushes. Obviously, we think back to the Adamses and the Kennedys. You guys aren't there yet, but what are your motivations here? I guess people want to know, is this about something making good for the family, or is this just about Levy Sanders is running?
Adam, my motivation, I've worked in legal services for over 17 years. I've been in a union for, I see the pain that people have. I see what's going on in a day-to-day life, that they are so anxious about going to the doctor, that they really, I talk to, mothers who really want their children to go to college and or university, and they can't afford it. I talk to folks ultimately in terms of, who want to become plumbers and do other things, and they don't even understand the process and where. So that's my motivation ultimately, is to do everything possible to make life as the best I can for the folks of New Hampshire who are getting beaten up so bad in terms of this economy.
All right. Well, it's a different Sanders, but the same passion is there. So, Levy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Adam. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.